The sun beat down relentlessly on the barren expanse of the desert, its rays searing the sand into a blistering heat that seemed to stretch to the ends of the world. Nara, the alien princess of the Vantari people, had never imagined such a fate. Exiled from her home world, betrayed by her own kin, she found herself stranded on a harsh, hostile planet. Earth, they had called it, a world filled with primitive creatures, a place she had only read about in ancient texts. Her ship, once a majestic vessel of technological marvels, had crashed, its systems failing one by one. Now, with no way to return home, Nara was trapped, alone, and lost in an unforgiving desert with no hope of rescue. Her pale skin, which once gleamed with the light of her home, now burned under the sun. Her long, silvery hair clung to her face, drenched with sweat. Her once glorious attire was torn and covered in dust, her royal stature diminished by the brutality of the desert. Her mind wandered to the thoughts of her people, her family, and her past life. Nara was a queen, once destined to rule a peaceful empire, but now she was nothing more than a helpless exile on a strange world, barely able to survive. Days had passed, or perhaps weeks, she could no longer tell. The desert had no markers of time, no signs of civilization. It was just endless sand and heat. Her body had grown weak, and her energy was rapidly depleting. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, there was a fire in her spirit that refused to die. She had always been strong, always had a will that could not be broken. But even the strongest can falter when faced with such a relentless enemy as the desert. As Nara stumbled through the sand, her steps becoming slower and more labored, she saw a shadow in the distance. It was so far away, barely visible against the heat-hazed horizon, but it was there, a form. Her heart skipped a beat. Had someone come to save her? She had no way of knowing if it was an illusion, a mirage created by the desert's cruel nature, but she forced herself to move toward it. The shadow grew closer, and soon she could make out the shape of a man, a human. He was tall, dressed in rugged clothes, and his face was partially covered by a scarf to shield him from the sun. As he came closer, Nara's legs gave way beneath her, and she collapsed to the ground, too weak to stand any longer. "Hey!" the man called, rushing to her side. "Are you okay?" Nara barely had the strength to speak, but she managed to whisper, "Please, help me." The man knelt beside her, his dark eyes filled with concern. "You're burning up," he said, carefully lifting her into his arms. "We need to get you out of this heat." Nara felt the world around her grow dim as he carried her, and she allowed herself to succumb to the weariness that threatened to consume her. She had never imagined that a human, a creature from this primitive world, would be the one to save her. But in that moment, all her pride, all her thoughts of her royal lineage vanished. She was simply a woman in need of help, and this stranger, this human, had come to her aid. The man carried her for what felt like hours, and as the sun began to set, they finally reached shelter, a small, makeshift camp set up under the cover of a rocky outcrop. He carefully placed her down on a blanket and began to tend to her, offering her water and checking her temperature. She was too exhausted to speak, but she watched him as he worked. "My name's Jack," the man said as he looked down at her, his expression kind but serious. "You're lucky I found you. I don't know what you were doing out here, but you're safe now." Nara nodded weakly, too drained to explain her story. She had no way of knowing whether Jack would believe her if she told him she was a princess, an alien, or if he would even care. For now, she was just another stranger in need of aid, and Jack was the one who had given her that help. Over the next few days, Jack tended to Nara's needs, nursing her back to health. He built a fire, shared his meager rations with her, and offered her a sense of comfort she hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. Nara tried to explain herself, but Jack, though curious about her strange appearance and unusual abilities, didn't ask too many questions. He simply listened and helped in any way he could. He offered her no judgment, only kindness. As Nara regained her strength, she began to feel something she hadn't felt since before the crash, a sense of peace. The world she had known, the one of royalty and grandeur, seemed so distant now. Jack, a human, was kind, selfless, and strong in a way she hadn't expected. There was no grand ambition in his heart, no thirst for power or conquest. He was simply a man trying to survive, just like her. In his presence, Nara felt safe. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to trust. Weeks passed, and Nara's health improved, but so did her bond with Jack. The desert, though harsh, had brought them together, and their shared experiences made them inseparable. Jack never once pushed her to explain more about herself, and Nara never felt the need to hide her true identity anymore. She had once been a queen, but here, in this quiet corner of the desert, she was simply Nara. No titles, no responsibilities, just a woman in love with a man who had shown her kindness when the rest of the world had turned its back on her. One day, as they sat by the fire, watching the sun set over the endless dunes, Nara turned to Jack, her heart full of emotions she had long since buried. "Jack, you saved my life, but I think you've done more than that. You've given me something I never thought I would have again." Jack looked at her, his expression softening. "I didn't do anything special. I just helped." "No," Nara said, her voice full of emotion. "You didn't just help me survive. You helped me live again." In the quiet of the desert night, Jack took her hand, and for the first time in her life, Nara realized that she had found a love more profound than any title or throne. It wasn't the love of royalty or power. It was the love of a simple man who had shown her compassion and humanity when she had thought both had been lost. As the days turned into months, Nara and Jack built a life together, free from the conflicts of the galaxy and the burden of her past. The desert, once a place of exile and punishment, had become their sanctuary. And when the stars filled the night sky, Nara looked up and knew that no matter what had happened before, she had found her place. Not as a queen, not as an alien, but as a woman who had been saved by love. And so, in the heart of the desert, Nara and Jack lived happily ever after. They built their own kingdom, one not of power or fear, but of love and mutual respect. Together, they faced every challenge, every hardship, and in each other, they found a strength that no one could take from them.